It began as a nuisance. Something small enough that I thought maybe, just maybe, I could overlook it. But as with all things involving Karen, the smallest inconvenience grew into a wildfire of entitlement and rage. The first time she parked her silver SUV in my garage, I thought it had to be a mistake. I came home from work, pressed the opener, and found her bloated vehicle sitting in the space where my truck should be. The audacity of it almost laughable. I knocked on her door, and she came waddling out with that smug tilt of her chin, insisting it was community property because my garage was visible from the street. I laughed then, thinking it was a joke. But she wasn't joking. Karen never joked when it came to control. The second time it happened, I confronted her more firmly, telling her to move the car immediately. She rolled her eyes, her voice dripping with disdain as she threw out the HOA handbook like it was scripture. "You're not allowed to use the garage for storage," she sneered. "And if you're not going to park your car in it at all times, then other residents may claim it." I almost choked on my own breath. Who gave her that authority? Certainly not the HOA bylaws, which I later read cover to confirm. But Karen lived in a world where her word was law, and anyone who challenged it was, in her mind, a criminal. By the third time, it wasn't just arrogance, it was war. She timed her invasions deliberately, waiting until I left for work or errands. I installed cameras, and sure enough, there she was, strutting across my driveway like she owned it, slipping her SUV into my garage with the triumphant air of a queen reclaiming her throne. The final straw came on a Saturday morning when I had promised to take my nephew fishing. We loaded up the gear, walked outside, and found her car once again squatting in the space. My nephew looked up at me, confused, and asked, "Why is her car here?" That was the moment something snapped inside me. I marched to her door and pounded until she opened it, her robe hanging loosely over her shoulders, hair in curlers, face painted with smug satisfaction. "Move it," I demanded, my voice low, trembling not from fear but from fury. She laughed in my face. "If you don't like it," she said sweetly, "call the cops. But remember, I run this neighborhood. They won't side with you." She slammed the door, leaving me staring at the wood as if it were a wall she thought could contain my resolve. What she didn't realize was that I had already done my homework. I knew the law. I knew my rights. And I knew exactly how to make her regret every smug word she had thrown at me. I called a towing company, not one of the HOA's pet contractors, but a private, licensed operator who specialized in property rights enforcement. They arrived in less than 30 minutes. A hulking truck with chains and hooks gleaming under the sun. My neighbors gathered, whispering, eyes wide with anticipation. Karen must have thought she had them all under her thumb. But people love a reckoning, and they knew one was about to unfold. The driver looked at the car, then at me. "She got permission?" he asked. I handed him the deed to my property, showing him the garage clearly marked within my boundaries. "Permission," I said, my voice sharp with certainty. "She's trespassing." He nodded once, then set to work. The clanking of chains, the grinding of gears, the groan of metal being pulled, all of it was music to my ears. The SUV lifted off its stolen perch like a stubborn beast being dragged into submission. Karen burst out of her house just in time to see her pride and joy suspended in the air. Her scream could have shattered glass. She ran toward us, waving her arms, her face blotched red with fury. "You can't do this. This is illegal. This is harassment," she shrieked, spittle flying from her mouth. The tow driver didn't even flinch. continuing his work with the patience of a man who had seen too many Karens in his career. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "this vehicle is trespassing." The property owner requested removal. "You're free to call the police if you think otherwise." She did call. Of course, stabbing at her phone with trembling fingers as if summoning her personal army. When the cops arrived, 2 cruisers pulling up with lights flashing, Karen's smugness returned for a brief moment. She pointed at me, shouting accusations, demanding my arrest, insisting I was a criminal. But the officers didn't look at me the way she expected. They looked at the paperwork I handed them, the deed, the security footage, the documented warnings I had given her. Their faces softened with understanding, then hardened with irritation as they turned to Karen. "Ma'am," one officer said sternly, "this isn't your garage. It never was. You're trespassing." Her jaw dropped. Her protests faltered. And for once, words failed her. The tow truck pulled away, her SUV groaning behind it, and Karen's shrieks followed down the street. But here's the twist she never saw coming. I had arranged not just for it to be towed, but for it to be hauled straight to the junkyard. By the time she scrambled to make calls and scream threats, her beloved SUV had already been processed, crushed into scrap metal, and sold by weight. She arrived hours later at the lot, demanding its return, only to be shown the flattened remains of what had once been her throne on wheels. The look on her face was something I will never forget, a mix of horror, disbelief, and the dawning realization that she was not untouchable. But the story didn't end there. The HOA, once her kingdom, turned against her. Neighbors who had been cowed into silence began to rise, emboldened by her humiliation. Complaints surfaced. Old finds were challenged. And suddenly the board meetings she once dominated became battlegrounds where her voice no longer carried weight. She screamed louder, demanded obedience. But the more she raged, the smaller she seemed. And when the HOA president finally stepped down amid scandal, Karen's influence evaporated like smoke in the wind. I didn't rejoice at her downfall, not the way she might have if the roles were reversed. Instead, I felt a deep, steady relief, like the air after a storm. My garage was mine again, my home safe, and my neighbors free from her tyranny. Karen's arrogance had led her to believe she could take what wasn't hers. But in the end, she learned the most brutal lesson: when you cross the line of respect, sometimes the consequences don't just take your car, they take your crown. And so I ask you now, when someone believes rules don't apply to them, when their entitlement tramples on the rights of others, is it better to ignore them and hope they stop? Or to stand firm, to fight back, and remind them that respect isn't optional, it's earned? The days following the Junkyard showdown were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For years, Karen had strutted around our neighborhood like a self-appointed queen, barking orders, taping violation notes to doors, and terrorizing anyone who dared to question her word. But now the power had shifted. The sound of her SUV being flattened into scrap still echoed in people's minds. And for the first time, neighbors whispered not with fear, but with laughter. You could almost feel the relief in the air, like chains being snapped after years of quiet oppression. Karen, of course, refused to accept reality. The very next day, she marched to my doorstep, red-faced and trembling with fury. She pounded her fists against the door so hard I thought the glass might crack. "You will pay for this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'll sue you. I'll sue the tow company. I'll sue the city if I have to." I opened the door slowly, letting her see the calm on my face. Calmness was the one weapon she couldn't match. and it made her angrier than any insult. "You've already lost, Karen," I said quietly. "Your car is gone. Your authority is gone. All that's left is your noise." I shut the door before she could hurl another insult, leaving her to scream at the wood. But Karen wasn't done. The twist came 2 nights later when I heard a sound outside scraping, like metal against concrete. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the driveway, only to find Karen crouched at the base of my garage door with a crowbar in hand. She looked like a burglar caught in the act, her nightgown swaying in the wind, sweat beading on her forehead. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the night. She spun around, eyes wild, and stammered. "Two was checking for safety violations. This garage isn't secure. It's a community hazard." My neighbors had heard the commotion and stepped outside, forming a half-circle behind me. Phones lit up the darkness as cameras began recording. For years, Karen had thrived in shadows, twisting truths where no one else was watching. But now she was exposed under the unforgiving glow of a dozen camera lenses. "Put the crowbar down, Karen," I said evenly. She froze, realizing there was no way to spin this moment. No escape from the reality that everyone could now see with their own eyes. The police arrived within minutes, lights painting the houses blue and red. Officers stepped out, their faces already tired of her antics. This time, she didn't scream for my arrest. She dropped the crowbar and tried to play the victim, sobbing that I had harassed her, that the entire neighborhood was conspiring to ruin her life. But no one believed her anymore. The officers reviewed the footage, exchanged knowing glances, and finally placed her in cuffs. Her wails echoed down the street. But they weren't cries of authority anymore, they were the cries of a woman watching her kingdom burn. Her arrest was the spark that lit a larger fire. With Karen gone, neighbors began speaking openly about the years of harassment. Mrs. Henderson revealed how Karen had threatened to fine her for keeping wind chimes. The Patel family described how she once demanded their children stop playing basketball in their own driveway because it ruined the aesthetic. Even the new couple down the street, who had only been here 6 months, admitted she had already cornered them with threats of fines over their unapproved welcome mat. Story after story spilled out, each one more absurd than the last, painting a portrait of a tyrant who had hidden behind HOA rules like armor. The HOA board tried to distance themselves from her, but the truth was unavoidable. Karen had been their enforcer, their mouthpiece, their shield. With her reputation crumbling, so did theirs. A petition circulated within days, demanding a full audit of the HOA's finances and practices. What they found was staggering: mismanaged funds, fraudulent fines, and suspicious contracts that funneled money to companies linked to Karen's cousins and friends. It wasn't just harassment, it was corruption. Plain and simple. By the end of the month, the HOA was dissolved under legal pressure, its bylaws shredded like the fragile paper they were. The neighborhood voted to establish a new community association, one built on fairness and transparency. For the first time, we held meetings where everyone's voice mattered. Decisions were made with hands raised, not fists slammed. The community began to heal, and the scars Karen left behind became reminders of why we had to stay united. As for Karen, her downfall was swift and merciless. The charges against her piled up: trespassing, harassment, attempted burglary, and HOA fraud once investigators dug deeper. Her court appearances became spectacles, neighbors filling the gallery not out of fear, but to witness justice unfolding. I sat through one session, watching her in the defendant's chair, smaller somehow, her arrogance drained, She muttered excuses, blamed stress, blamed loneliness, blamed anything but herself. But no one listened anymore. The gavel fell, and with it, the final shred of her power was gone. I remember walking home that evening, the air crisp, the stars bright above me. My garage stood empty, mine once again, its door gleaming after a fresh coat of paint my neighbors had helped me apply. It wasn't just a garage, Anna Maria, it was a symbol. A symbol that no matter how loud, how arrogant, or how entitled someone becomes, they cannot take what is not theirs. Respect is not demanded. It is earned. And Karen had earned nothing but her own downfall. Weeks later, as I stood by my driveway, Alex, the young neighbor who had once been too scared to speak, walked up to me. He smiled sheepishly, then said, "You showed us all how to stand up. For years we thought we had to live with her controlling everything. But you proved we don't." I clapped him on the shoulder, pride swelling in my chest. No one should ever live in fear of their neighbor, I told him. And now, you won't have to. The neighborhood is different now. Kids play in driveways without fear of notes appearing on their doors. Families host cookouts without being fined for unauthorized gatherings. People greet each other with warmth instead of whispers of caution. The garage that once symbolized conflict now holds nothing more threatening than my old fishing gear and a lawnmower. But to us, it represents freedom hard-won. And sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking back to that moment when Karen's SUV was crushed at the junkyard. The screech of metal, the crumpling of her entitlement into a square of worthless scrap, it was more than justice for me. It was justice for everyone she had ever tried to control. So I leave you with this question: when arrogance invades your space, when entitlement claws at your freedom, should you turn away in silence, or should you stand tall? Take action, and show that respect for others is not optional, but the foundation of any true community.